Well, in a number of ways. We see climate threat, or climate change, as a threat multiplier in some very volatile regions in the world. Syria is an excellent example. I mean, there are droughts, severe droughts in Syria that drove water shortages and drove food prices up, destabilized the economy and the government, and led to a situation that allowed for the type of thing that's happening there now to happen. It didn't create it, but it allowed for it to happen. And clearly, sea level rise and storms and threats of storms, natural disasters. In the 80s, there were less than 400 per year in the world. In the last decade, there were more than 800 per year in the world. So more and more of these severe storms, it also threatens our training capability. I mean, just recently here in central Texas, there were live fire restrictions at Fort Hood because of the danger of forest fires and things after fast drought. Understandably so, but it impacts the ability to train the soldiers if you can't do live fire. That's thankfully not there anymore as a restriction, but we get all kinds of restrictions on our military bases which cause significant problems in our training.
And I think if you expand this issue about parts of the world which are at risk, and conflict is never a simple single cause, or very rarely it's a single cause for conflict. There's normally a number of factors that come into it. And it might be to do with shortages of food, energy or water, challenges of population density in those countries, growing demand not being met, health issues, all of which may be beyond the government's ability of those countries to actually deal with it. And climate change is principally going to affect those countries that are already suffering from those problems. And that increases instability around the world and therefore puts a threat on what I would describe as geopolitical stability, which is a threat to national security in the sense if there's conflict and that conflict has an impact on our own interests of our countries, or the United States, UK, Europe, whatever, but also in the sense if it means that it's posing a risk to sustained economic growth, prosperity and our well-being. And 3 or 4 years ago, the sort of head of the British Armed Forces was asked what does he think was the biggest threat to UK national security, and he said it's a failure of the economy to recover. And if climate change poses a threat to your economic growth, that in itself is a threat to national security just as much as in direct impact. So it's complex and it covers a multitude of issues. It's unlikely to be a cause of conflict on its own, but as General Eickmann says, it is a threat multiplier and it increases the risk of instability around the world and therefore conflict.
Even will add tensions in stable regions of the world. And we think because of us responding, the U.S. military responding to natural disasters, to conflict around the world, that it's a threat to the United States and to our military forces.
Sahel, which is that belt across Africa between the North African Maghreb and the Sahara, and below that in South Africa and Central Africa. And that's a region that's very vulnerable. Increasingly there are studies, both academic and through organisations like United Nations, UNICEF, the Children's Fund, showing the correlation between climate change, conflict. In the UNICEF report it's about youth as well, but other stuff has shown that these are factors contributing to some of those terrorist organisations which are thriving in those communities. Again, you could look at the Arab Spring, the bread riots in Tunisia. There is a direct link between the heat wave in Russia in 2010, which caused a shortage of wheat, which caused Russia not to export wheat at the same time as it was failed harvest because of extreme weather events in Canada and Australia, which puts the price of wheat up, which puts the price of bread up, which was one of the factors that contributed to the riots in Tunisia, which kicked off the Arab Spring, which snowballed along. And what we saw was when we got to Libya, the price of oil went up by $18 a barrel. That starts to make us, industries that use energy less competitive, and the challenges, so there's a knock-on effect. So that's how you see it permeating right through the world.
And if you look at a longer distance, I mean, we've seen all kinds of projections of sea level rise. Sea level is projected, NASA projects sea level will rise by 2 to 4 feet by the end of the century. I've seen projections from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to be half a meter to a meter, but again, 2 to 3 or 4 feet. If that happens, then 50% of the Mekong Delta is underwater, which produces most of the rice for Southeast Asia. And 20 million people in Bangladesh live within 3 feet of sea level. What do you do with those people? Where do they go? How do you feed the population? And as the people migrate, do they go to India or Pakistan? India and Pakistan doesn't want them. And so that create border conflicts. What happens? And we will get involved. How do we solve that? We need to address the issues now so that that doesn't happen. It's not going to be a short-term fix, right? We mentioned earlier today that the military is doing a lot to reduce its carbon footprint, its emissions, and if we can slow the growth of climate change, it's going to happen quickly. It's going to take a while, but we can do that. We can also build resilience. We can deal with these countries. We don't know exactly what the answer is for any one country, but we got to start the discussion and develop a plan to counter the threat that particular country faces.
Yeah, and I think it falls into two areas. There's the area of adaptation to what's in the system, and there's mitigation. Now, there is no security solution to climate change, but the military community do have a part to play as part of society, and they can be at the cutting edge of technology, and that can be transferred in the same way that we saw it with the internet, with GPS and other things coming from either the military or the space program. And also the tools that the military use in their analysis can be used to help national governments in their analysis. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of other people apart from the military who've got a part to play in reducing those risks, both in the short and the longer term. But as General Eickmann said, we're in for the long haul on this one.